It's so strange to think that the Elder Scrolls 6 trailer came out 7 years ago. But while we spent the past 13 years waiting for Todd Howard to remember what a good RPG actually looks like, an indie studio in Poland released a game that does what you gaslit yourself into hoping Bethesda would. Well, Chief, allow me to introduce you to Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon, a love letter to the traditional Scrolls-like formula your heart so deeply yearns for. But unlike Bethesda, they actually give a rat's ass about whether you enjoy the game or not. Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon, or as the cool kids like to say, Tuktafoa, is a first-person sandbox RPG set in a dark, grim, and miserable world, where you, after trying to do an Oblivion-style prison escape, accidentally stumble upon the soul of King Arthur.
I am Arthur Pendragon.
That's right, nerd. This game follows a reimagining of Arthurian legend, and is probably one of my favorite selling points about it. The universe they've built is a blend of different medieval cultures and European folklore, with the main overtone being that of survival, conquest, and harmony. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the universes Bethesda has created, even Shitfield. But unlike Starfield and how utterly bland it felt trying to actually explore the universe, this game manages to masterfully blend a whole bunch of cool real-world folklore in a way that's fun to engage with, and I really appreciate them bringing to life a story that is so often underused. Thankfully, that story is incredibly engaging for the most part, and the developers did a really great job of making you actually care about the things you're doing, rather than just going from point A to point B. The entire plot of trying to rebuild the soul of King Arthur, while also figuring out what in the oogie boogie fuck is going on with the weirdness, is so satisfying and well written. What makes it even better is having King Arthur commenting on the world and how much his legacy has fallen from grace. You get to experience the story not only through your own eyes, but also the eyes of someone who built the very world you see has descended into violence and disarray. Better yet, I absolutely loved how intentional everything felt while playing, but without holding your hand to make sure you're guaranteed to experience everything. I'll never forget when I decided to randomly explore some shithole cave on the opposite side of the map, only to accidentally stumble upon a pretty important guild questline that I would have never predicted in a million years. Now don't get me wrong, I explore everything, so I would have found it regardless, but the fact that they don't force every single major quest in front of you like Bethesda seems to love doing recently, makes exploring the world all the more rewarding. Mini quests have you actually doing something of value, rather than just fetching shit and returning it, or clearing out yet another copy-pasted dungeon. And not only are they really fun to play, but quite a few of them also involve uncomfortable choices that are simply a matter of choosing between the lesser of two evils. And what I love most is how you often don't know what to expect. There were a few times where I thought I was making the morally right choice, only to be completely miserable with the outcome, and also times where I gave into the dark side, but was surprisingly okay with the consequences from those decisions. Now that doesn't mean it's entirely a depression speedrun simulator like Dark Souls or Expedition 33. There are a lot of positive outcomes, despite how unpleasant and bleak the world is. But the main point is, there are actual choices that test your ethics, rather than just the illusion of choice. Continuing on from that point, I absolutely loved how willing the writers were with tackling uncomfortable ideas, complex moral discussions, and the consequences of one's own actions. A very frequent theme that runs throughout the game, and one that I really love, is the notion of the ends justifying the means, and how easy it is to descend into villainy, or cause an absolute shit show in pursuit of survival or what's right. I often find myself arguing against pragmatists in real life, so it's nice seeing something that fairly portrays the harms of both pragmatism and pure virtue. It also covers quite a few other interesting topics like revenge, betrayal, loneliness and isolation, regret, and also having to deal with the consequences of choices when you aren't the one making them. All of which were tastefully handled without ever feeling ham-fisted or preachy. Now with that said, I do have some pretty big grievances with the storytelling and quest structure of the game. Firstly, while the main story of Arthur and a lot of the surrounding quests are incredibly fun, I fucking hated how simplistic they treated Camelot versus the rest of the world. It essentially boils down to, Camelot bad but powerful, others good but weak. I understand the whole point of the game is the downfall of Arthur's legacy, and for that you need to demonstrate Camelot as having lost its way. But I really wish a greater effort was put into making the other side have serious flaws beyond just incompetence, or at the very least cause a lot of harm in pursuit of what's right. I'll never forget one of the pivotal decisions you have to make in Act 1, and how blatantly bad they tried making the one side look, while not really exploring the negatives of the other side at all. Both characters are awful, but with one being very clearly worse than the other. However, there's no tangible redemption for siding with them in Camelot, even though there very clearly should be. And this notion of stupid choices isn't just for Camelot. While the choices you get to make for most of the game are incredibly thoughtful and captivating, there are a few times where it utterly drops the ball and forces you into nonsensical binaries just for the sake of driving the plot along. Remember those two sides I mentioned earlier? Well, what I didn't mention was how if you do choose the one side, the game then further forces you into one of the dumbest fucking choices I've ever seen in a video game. Either do exactly what this person tells you, despite multiple other options being very plausible and not as stupid or annoying, or refuse to cooperate and literally lose the entire first hub as well as important lore for the game. This does happen a few times throughout the game, and I know the obvious argument is that this is a small studio with a limited budget, but I'm going to justify why it's not an excuse in my next and last grievance on this topic. While the main quest and plenty of side quests in Act 2 are super interesting and gripping like the rest of the game, there is so much bloat and artificial padding of playtime with lackluster side quests here that it really felt like they sacrificed quality in other parts of the game just to pump up the number of hours in Act 2 for marketability. So many side quests have the same forced nonsense I mentioned from before, and unfortunately, you are somewhat forced to do them for reasons I'll explain a little later. Not only are the choices much blander here, but a lot of the side quests aren't nearly as thoughtful or interesting, and I find myself getting really bored at times due to the random nature of not knowing whether this next quest would be fun or bland. But while the narrative has its strengths and weaknesses, none of that would really matter if actually playing the damn game felt like ass, which is what we're diving into next.
Oh my.
First of all, before we actually discuss the gameplay, let's just get the most blatantly obvious part out of the way. If you haven't already caught on yet, this is very much a AA game with a smaller budget, and you will almost certainly feel that at times. There is quite a bit of jank, and while they did an incredibly good job of keeping it as bug-free as possible, you can definitely tell they had to make some hard decisions with the overall identity of the game. Now, if you are someone who hasn't had their dopamine receptors fried by games like Elden Ring or Doom like I have, then the combat and gameplay will definitely be enjoyable and get you through the experience perfectly well enough. Hell, even if you are like me, the combat is still passable and fine enough for the kind of game this is. With that being said though, I do feel like this style of gameplay, specifically with regards to melee combat, is starting to get a little outdated and needs to be revitalized in some way. The dodge and slide mechanics are a nice touch, and there definitely are a lot of positives gameplay wise, which I'll get to later. But holy shit is it so boring playing with the same floaty and repetitive combat style from Scrolls-likes that existed 13 years ago. Enemy AI is okay, but not very exciting, and all of your attack patterns feel virtually the same, with little to no variety as the game progresses. Not only that, but the balancing of this game is so incredibly inconsistent and frustratingly dogshit at times. It has a decently steep progression curve at first depending on the difficulty you're playing, but then it becomes a 50-50 of either one-shotting enemies or getting mogged by overtuned bosses. Once you reach Act 2 though, it gets corrupted by the weirdness apparently and starts doing ludicrous nonsense where everything decided to give you the full-fledged prison experience. This is why I mentioned being forced to do the side content earlier, because if you don't, you're not going to have a good time. But then, at the end of Act 2, you get overpowered gear and spells that basically turn you into a god, and then the game becomes trivially easy from then on out. A game where you constantly have to play around with the difficulty settings to not hate the experience is not a well-designed one. The main point is that something needs to change with this approach to combat. Maybe they could implement something completely fresh like a Kingdom Come Deliverance radial system, or possibly keep the current feel, but add different movesets and make hits feel more weighty. I'm not sure, let me know in the comments what you think would be best. But I digress. While the actual combat system is a little outdated to me, the rest of the gameplay is absolutely fan-fucking-tastic. I mentioned earlier the gear and spells you get, but what I didn't mention was how utterly glorious they were both visually and mechanically. Like I said, this game is incredibly dark and broody, so naturally, everything in-game needs to follow suit. What I really love though, is how weapons and armor fit the aesthetic perfectly without being too edgy or overdone. Sure, there's a few skulls, horns, and spikes here and there, but thankfully it's not in your face or distastefully done, and they give you plenty of more normal looking gear that you're never forced to choose the edgelord shit for efficiency. The unique gear is especially fun and often has really interesting mechanics to them. Whether it be slicing energy waves with a sword, or having a 50% chance to Hiroshima your enemies with fucking starlight nukes, the weapons and armor are incredibly creative and fun to build around. And they have a transmog system too, so if there's a weapon or armor piece you really like, you can just pay to have it reskinned, which I absolutely love. But the weapons and armor aren't the only prodigal child in this regard. The spells absolutely kick ass too. They're actually interesting and fun to play with. And sure, quite a few of them are just slightly different versions of each other, but for the most part, they're all incredibly unique and fun to wield. Whether it be shooting ethereal darts at your enemy, summoning a lightning bolt from above, or having an army of summons whoop ass harder than your dad that time you broke the kitchen window, there's always some way to have fun with the magic they give you. With all that said though, this game is absolutely fantastic despite its quirks, and I genuinely encourage you to play it if you're a fan of Bethesda games and haven't already. Hell, even if you have, maybe it's time to return to Avalon and hear Arthur's sexy, seductively smooth voice while you question your sexuality one more time. Questline really deserves some big props, not only for this absolutely magnificent game, but also for making an incredibly good card game too. I genuinely think it's time for Bethesda to fuck off. They've had their chance in the spotlight and clearly proved that once studios get too big and start including corporate shareholder horse crap, the studio is no longer capable of creating good games that respect your time. At first I hoped Obsidian would step up to the plate and take Bethesda behind the barn, but clearly they're not going to. So now, maybe it's time we let yet another Polish studio take the reins and show these dorks how it's done. Anyways, I'm out, and I appreciate it if you made it this far. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and keep on being a champ, you absolute Giga Chad.